Chapter 8, A Crown from Chaos. This was never about building kingdoms. It was never about power. It was never about followers, titles, or thrones. It was about a man who worked himself to the bone, trying to give his family stability, safety, and self-sufficiency, only to have that ground ripped out from under him in a way so clean, so quiet, it felt almost poetic, karmic, like the universe had swept the board clear and said, "Start again." He didn't choose the woodland because it was romantic. He ended up there because there was nowhere else left to stand. And when he got there, stripped of security, stripped of certainty, stripped of everything he built, he was told something even harsher, that even this last patch of ground, his final foothold, was up for argument, that it could be questioned, challenged, taken. So he stood, not because he wanted to fight, because retreat wasn't an option anymore. None of this was born from ego, none of it was planned, none of it was orchestrated. The only thing Danny ever did, the only thing, was tell his story, online, plainly, without polish, without performance. He used the internet as a soundboard, a place to speak truth out loud so it didn't rot inside him. That was it. He didn't summon people, he didn't recruit, he didn't promise anything. And yet something happened. People listened. People recognized something familiar. People moved. The rest didn't come from him. The rest wrote itself. History has a habit of doing that when pressure meets honesty. And by the time Danny realized what had formed around him, the shape was already there, the structure already standing, the weight already resting on his shoulders. The crown wasn't claimed. It arrived. Even those who stood on the land felt it. No one needed to be told what was happening. No decree was issued. No banner was raised first. The people already there simply oriented. They gravitated towards something that was forming, whether anyone named it or not. A kingdom shaped not by ambition, but by gravitational influence. What they were responding to wasn't land ownership or authority. It was coherence. A structure being projected outward from the internal workings of a dragon's mind. A system already built, tested, and refined under pressure long before it ever touched soil. The kingdom wasn't constructed from timber and tents first. It was constructed inside a man's head. And once that internal order existed, the external world did what it always does around the true center of gravity. It arranged itself. Here's the way this needs to land. In crude early settlements, medieval villages, frontier towns, borderlands, order doesn't come from comfort. It comes from will and justice colliding. Someone draws a line, someone else tests it, and whatever survives that collision becomes law, whether anyone likes it or not. That's what Waywood had become. Not a utopia, not a rebellion fantasy, a pressure-built settlement forged out of necessity. Danny wasn't squatting someone else's dream. He wasn't posturing. It was his land, his ground, bought, paid for, claimed. And when external systems tried to remove him, councils, letters, veiled threats, it wasn't ideology that held the line. It was willpower backed by legitimacy. That matters, because in old world terms, that's the difference between a bandit camp and a kingdom. Justice doesn't have to be polite. It just has to be defensible. And Danny defended it, over and over, until eventually the pressure eased. Not because authority relented out of kindness, but because it recognized endurance. That's when the external war quietened, and this is where the story sharpens. Because whenever a dragon finally gets a moment to rebuild, clawing order out of shattered pieces, stacking stone on stone again, karma doesn't send another army. It sends a disruptor. And I'll say this straight. I bet you forgot about that earlier warning, the one about remembering what comes next. Most people do, because the threat doesn't look like a threat when it arrives. This one walked in smiling. The new force entering this dynamic wasn't a soldier, a bureaucrat, or a rival king. They were a snake monkey. And that combination is not random. In Chinese Zodiac psychology, snake monkey is volatile intelligence, pattern recognition without loyalty, adaptation without grounding, charm layered over calculation. Where dragons build vertically and horses move forward, snake monkey moves sideways, through systems, around defenses, between people. A snake monkey doesn't attack walls. They loosen stones. This is karmic deconstruction energy, not demolition by force, demolition by implication, by suggestion, by doubt, by clever reframing, by nudging pressure points. Danny himself hadn't fully finished reinforcing yet. And here's why this matters now. Danny wasn't rebuilding from abundance. He was rebuilding from ruins, from loss, grief, betrayal, and the memory of everything that had already been taken from him. He was doing it consciously this time. Yes, stronger, sharper, but still exposed in places that only a very specific archetype could see. Snake Monkey sees unfinished architecture. They don't oppose dragons head on. They test coherence. They introduce ambiguity. They blur intent. They make others question what they felt solid about 5 minutes ago. And when you drop that energy into a settlement already layered with dragons, snakes, horses, oxen, tigers, already tight with pressure, it doesn't create chaos immediately. It creates instability that looks like intelligence, which is far more dangerous. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't fate being cruel. This was karma saying, you've rebuilt the walls. Now let's see if the foundations hold when someone clever walks through the gate. And that's the moment the story turns again. Not with fire, not with force, but with a presence that knows exactly where to stand to make everything start shifting. This is the crucial clarification, and it needs to be said cleanly and without romance. By the time the Kingdom of Waywood reached this stage, it wasn't failing, but it also wasn't functioning as efficiently as it could have. And that wasn't because it was wrong. It was because the dynamic had outlived its purpose. There were too many variables and not enough stabilizers. Too many warriors and not enough civilians. Too much momentum, not enough direction. Too much readiness for conflict. And suddenly, no conflict left to justify it. The original goal had been achieved. The ground was held. The claim was staked. The external pressure had eased into an unspoken accord. And what remained wasn't a kingdom yet. It was a band of warriors who had come for a fight, but the fight didn't arise. It resolved. When warriors don't get war, displacement sets in. That's the part most people miss. Displacement always comes before demolition. Energy doesn't vanish, it turns sideways. Frustration has to go somewhere. Purpose without an enemy curdles. And when that happens, the structure doesn't collapse from attack, it erodes from within. This is where karma gets surgical, because the snakes don't arrive randomly. Cain, the snake, came first, and his chaos was instructional. He nudged, he pressured, he agitated. He pushed Danny to shed an old skin and become Spike, sharper, harder, more volatile. That phase had a purpose. Spike was needed. The lesson was learned. The skin was shed. And in that shedding, the child was gone, not murdered, but ended. Innocence closed, dependency severed. The boy could not come forward into what was required next. Then Lyde the snake arrived, and her chaos was violent by comparison. Not nudging, not guiding, drop kicking. She didn't encourage shedding. She ripped whole layers away. Farmer, businessman, domestic stability, old life gone. Her role wasn't refinement, it was extraction. Brutal, necessary, undeniable. She forced Danny out of everything that could no longer be carried forward. And what she took with her finally was a civilian. The part of him that still believed safety could be outsourced, that normal life could be preserved inside a system already at war. And then, only then, came the snake monkey. This is where it gets dangerous. Because the snake monkey doesn't destroy through force or upheaval. She destroys through seduction. Her chaos isn't loud. It's clever. It doesn't tear structures down. It makes them question themselves. It doesn't shove. It invites. It doesn't attack. It distracts. It strips certainty away by reframing it, by offering alternatives, by making erosion feel like insight. This wasn't about war anymore. This was about deconstruction. She arrived at the exact moment when the kingdom had fulfilled its original purpose, but hadn't yet transformed into what it needed to become next. When the warriors were restless, when leadership was stretched, when the internal and external systems were slightly out of sync. That timing isn't coincidence. That's karmic sequencing. The snake teaches shedding. The second snake enforces it. The snake monkey tests whether what remains is real or just habit. And this wasn't punishment. It was refinement. Because if the Kingdom of Waywood was ever going to become more than a reaction, more than a fortress built in defiance, then everything that no longer served had to be tempted, peeled, and quietly removed. Not smashed, not burned, seductively unmade. And that's where the real danger began. The thing people misunderstand most about the snake monkey is that she didn't arrive dramatically. She didn't come from afar. She didn't announce herself. She didn't infiltrate. She walked straight up to the gate, bold, calm, unthreatening. No armor, no urgency, no obvious agenda. She wasn't dragged in by chaos or desperation. She was simply there one day, close enough that her presence didn't feel foreign. In fact, geographically, she was now the closest person outside of Waywood that Danny knew. And that matters because proximity breeds normality, and familiarity lowers defenses faster than force ever could. She wasn't questioned. She wasn't challenged. She simply came to the gate one day, and she was invited in, organically, casually, the same way most things entered Waywood, not because anyone was careless, but because the kingdom had learned to recognize sincerity over spectacle, and she felt sincere. That was the danger. She didn't ignite a fuse. She made the fuse feel seductive, comfortable, like something that had always been there. Snake monkey energy doesn't rush catastrophe. It softens inevitability. It reframes erosion as insight. It makes people feel like they're choosing, even when the slope is already angled. And she didn't start with Danny. That would have been crude. She worked on Lee first, snake to snake, because snakes recognize each other instantly, not through words, but through rhythm, restraint, and the spaces between sentences. League was already the most vigilant one in the dynamic, the watcher, the guard, the one who scanned for threat before it arrived. If you win over the snake who protects the dragon, you don't need to force entry. The door opens itself. The snake monkey didn't challenge the snake dog's instincts. She validated them, echoed them, reflected concerns without claiming ownership of them. Snake monkey doesn't confront snake dog. She aligns just enough to be trusted. And once that trust exists, even partially, the field changes. Because snake dog energy operates on loyalty and vigilance. Once someone clears the threat assessment, they're waved through. Lee wasn't naive. She was convinced. And that distinction matters. Now, place that beside what a dragon is naturally drawn toward. Dragons don't orbit stability the way dogs do. They orbit complexity, intelligence, movement, multi-layered perception, especially after shedding skins and standing amid the wreckage of transformation. Monkey energy hums at a frequency dragons hear, even when they're not consciously listening. It isn't lust. It isn't temptation. It's recognition of mental agility. Where snake dog offers grounded loyalty and protective heat, snake monkey offers curiosity, reframing, and the illusion of infinite paths forward. To a dragon carrying the weight of leadership, that can feel like oxygen, even subconsciously, especially subconsciously. That's how it happens. That snake monkey didn't pull Danny away. She made it feel like standing still wasn't possible anymore. And in a system already stretched, warriors without a war, leadership without an enemy, a kingdom that had achieved its first purpose, but not yet discovered its next. That subtle shift was enough. This wasn't manipulation in the cartoon sense. This was karmic mechanics. Snake dog guards. Snake monkey redirects. Dragon follows momentum when momentum presents itself as insight. By the time anyone realized what was happening, nothing had technically gone wrong, which is exactly why it couldn't be stopped. Because the most dangerous forces don't arrive shouting. They arrive sounding reasonable. It was easy, too easy for the snake monkey to convince Danny, not because he was foolish, not because he was careless, but because dragons listen when something sounds intelligent, adaptive, useful. Monkey energy didn't oppose him. She didn't flatter him either. She framed herself as complementary, as insight, as someone who could help the system think. Danny heard that. Lee didn't. She stayed suspicious, and that matters, because Snake Dog's suspicion isn't paranoia, it's pattern memory. Lee felt the shift immediately. Not dramatic, not hysterical, just a tightening, a quiet, persistent sense that something had changed its posture inside the walls. The snake monkey had her foot in the door, and Lily could feel it. Even if she couldn't get point to a single broken rule, that's when the furniture started moving. Not literally, structurally. Conversations shifted, influence redistributed, priorities subtly reframed. The center of gravity and sidewayward began to slide, just a few inches at a time, enough that those who weren't rooted properly started to wobble. Displacement took hold, and displacement always takes the weakest links first. The shaman went first, not with ceremony. He simply couldn't hold position anymore. The system had no place for his self-appointed authority once the gravity changed. He drifted out, pushed not by force but by irrelevance. Then the two fools followed. And that wasn't quiet. They didn't leave gently. They didn't slip away unnoticed. Their exit carried noise, friction, resentment, the kind of departure that rattles doors on the way out. But when the dust settled, what remained was clarity. They left Waywood, and Waywood held. That's the moment the true Waywoodians finally breathed. Because this is the truth most people don't like admitting. A kingdom isn't proven when it attracts people. It's proven when it survives their departure. That was the victory. Not the land, not the buildings, not the flag. The survival of the core. With the unstable elements gone, the remaining Waywoodians could finally celebrate. Not wildly, not arrogantly, but with the deep bone-level relief of knowing the structure had held under stress. The kingdom had been won, and the crown, whether Danny wanted it or not, had been earned. People came from all around to witness it, not to overthrow, not to challenge, just to see, to stand on the ground and feel the weight of what had been forged there, to recognize that this wasn't an accident anymore. This wasn't a reaction. It was a center. And with that recognition, with the victory acknowledged and the crown settled, the story doesn't end. It sharpens again. Because once a kingdom is secured, the next question is, never can it survive. It's what survives next. By this point, the dragon-dragon dynamic was no longer theoretical. It was emerging visibly, whether anyone around Danny understood it or not. On the outside, things looked functional, calm even. He showed up. He spoke clearly. He handled pressure. He made decisions. If you were watching from a distance, you might have thought this was Danny finally mastering himself. That would be a mistake. Because that wasn't Danny. That was Chief Raul Halvar. An emergent construct, an operational archetype, an autopilot, but not the kind born of collapse or dissociation like Chuck, and not the weaponized survival response that Spike had been. This one was different. This one had vision. Where Chuck drifted and Spike burned, Chief Raul held. Responsibility, duty, obligation. He carried weight deliberately. He wasn't improvising. He was stewarding. And while he handled the external world, leadership, conflict, diplomacy, endurance, the real work was happening elsewhere, internally. Danny himself wasn't standing at the front of the stage. He was inside, grinding away, gaining knowledge, turning cogs, convening war councils, debating in the Crimson Courtyard, running simulations, stress-testing outcomes, processing layers of consequence that never reached the surface. The court was active. The council was arguing. The machinery was running constantly. Chief Raul was the interface, the mask the world interacted with. While Danny the Dragon was doing what dragons do best when they're left alone long enough, building systems capable of carrying future catastrophes. And that's the part people don't see. The calm wasn't peace. The stability wasn't rest. The functionality wasn't resolution. It was preparation. So when the crown was earned, not claimed, not demanded, but bestowed, and the day of coronation arrived, it didn't mark the beginning of power. It marked readiness. Because Chief Raul didn't step forward to celebrate. He stepped forward to become everything, right before losing everything. And that timing, brutal, precise, unavoidable, is exactly how karma works when it's dealing with a dragon who's finally strong enough to survive what comes next. The coronation itself was never meant to be grand. It was planned, yes, but humble. Small, Waywoodian in the truest sense of the word. No spectacle, no pageantry for the sake of ego. Just a gathering of people who had endured together, marking a moment that felt earned rather than declared. But while Waywood prepared in good faith, elsewhere, other forces were still moving. The fools hadn't finished burning. They chose a different tactic this time. Not confrontation, not noise, but exposure. A third party, in the form of a film crew. The intention was clear enough. Document the coronation, frame it as delusion, paint the kingdom as farce. Shame it, diminish it. Turn the moment of unity into something to be mocked. Word reached Waywood, and Waywood responded, not with panic, not with aggression, but with intelligence. A script was written. Roles were played. Not because anyone believed the performance mattered, but because control of narrative always does. If they were going to be observed, they would be observed on their own terms. And yet fate had no interest in scripts. Because on that day, reality took over. No symbolism, no metaphor, just weight, gravity, impact. John the Horse, builder, mentor, brother-in-arms, the one who kept pushing Danny forward when stopping would have been easier, was severely injured. And in that moment, everything stripped bare. No crowns, no cameras, no performance, just people. And this is where Waywood proved itself. When things turned bad, when the kind of moment arrived that usually makes people scatter, fold, or turn inward, the Waywoodians didn't. They rallied. They moved as one. Hands, voices, bodies, instinct. The kind of response you don't rehearse. The kind that only exists when something real has been built underneath the roles. And the cameras caught all of it. Not a spectacle, not a scandal, but a community in action. What was meant to expose weakness instead revealed strength. What was meant to shame instead showed resilience. The film crew didn't document a kingdom pretending to exist. They documented one behaving as if it already did. And that was the turning point. Because from that day on, the people of Waywood were no longer warriors waiting for the next battle. They became villagers, rooted, protective, interdependent. And once that happens, a kingdom stops being an idea. It becomes a place. At this point, king and queen shared their kingdom with their son, the prince, and with the living reality of what Waywood had become. John, the injured horse, was there now, grounded, recovering, still unyielding in spirit even as his body healed. Beside him was Gemma, his partner. The loyal ox, steady, practical, holding things together in the way oxen always do when the world wobbles. Their two children moved through the space too, their presence adding noise, friction, laughter, and the quiet domestic dramas that never make it into legend, but are the real proof of life continuing. Maud and T were there as well, each carrying their own tensions, their own background stories unfolding alongside the larger one. Restless. Relationships strained and flexed the way they always do when people live close. Two new faces had entered the fold, a rat and his partner, the boar. Their two children followed them in, bringing with them that unmistakable shift. The moment a place stops being experimental and starts being inhabited. The dog remained, present, uncomplicated, a constant thread rather than a statement. Ellen was still there too, moving in and out like a tide, back and forth, never fully gone, never fully fixed, exactly as she always had been. And around them all, the wider rhythm of Waywood continued. Regular visitors, returning faces, passing hands, conversations picked up where they'd last been left. The woodland breathed. This time something was different. With cooperation, the politics worked. Not because everyone agreed, but because enough people understood what mattered and what didn't. Roles settled, friction existed without tearing the fabric. Authority didn't need to be shouted. Responsibility didn't need to be begged for. For the first time, it wasn't just holding together out of defiance. It was working. And for a brief, hard-earned moment, it looked like they had truly made it.